Good evening, everybody. It's about 6:30 on the old computer. Today is Tuesday, July 17th, 2018. It's a regularly scheduled meeting of the Marquette Township Board, and if you would join us in the pledge, we'd appreciate it. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk Rattari, roll call.
Trustee LaRue.
Here.
Trustee Wiegand.
Here.
Trustee Everson.
Here.
Trustee Marks.
Present.
Treasurer Johnson.
Here.
Clerk Rattari is here, and Supervisor Durant.
Here.
Staff present is Manager Gerard, Township Attorney Roger Zappa, Assistant Chief Dan Shanahan, Fire Marshal Rob Cochran. Committee members here are Mike Springer from Planning, Recreation, and Roads. And we have the Marquette County Sheriff here also tonight.
Thank you. Any public comment? Anybody wish to address the board? Name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Mike Springer. I'm here representing the Rec Committee tonight. I'd like to show you a little project that the Rec Committee, our Township Management, and Rotary has been involved in, and what we've completed just recently at Lions Field, or Lions Recreation Area. It's the swing set, the Rotary swing set. As you recall, I'm sorry, I got to do this too. It's not showing up there. Okay, as you will recall, Sally Davis and Scott Nafala came and presented a check to our township to Supervisor Durant here for the cost of the swing set that we were not able to afford due to budget cuts. Thanks to Christy Bleck, not last Sunday, but the Sunday before, July 8th, there was an article in the Mining Journal regarding the Rotary Clubs and the swing set that was installed. She noted that this new piece of equipment was a result of township management, the Recreation Committee, and 3 Rotary Clubs collaborating to bring this to Lions Recreation Area. Now, it was nice that we had an auger to drill these holes or bore the holes for us. Problem was the auger was just a little bit too small, so we still had to go in there and trim out the sides of these holes so we could get the tubes in there. We even ran into water. There's a high water table in Lions Field, or at least this particular part, so we're moving water along with mud. The Lions Club members came over while we were pouring concrete.
Rotary.
I'm sorry?
Rotary Club. You said Lions, Mike.
Lions Field.
Lions Recreation Area, yes. And so we poured the mud to secure this, flattened it out, and here we have 3 representatives from the 3 Rotary Clubs. We have, I don't know the gentleman, do you know, Randy, the gentleman in the dark blue?
That's Wilbur Jennings. Wilbur Jennings.
Okay, thank you. And Sally Davis and Jim Becker. This wasn't the last one that I sent.
Let me
I
see
had a
here.
couple more photos that Jason McCarthy provided that I put in.
Let me see here.
It was the most recent one I sent. I sent that one initially and then,
Follow up.
Try this one. This one was the...
okay. Yeah, our staff planner, or planner and zoning administrator, Jason McCarthy, sent me a few after this. Here we go. A few more pictures that I wanted to include. How come this is not? Okay. Here we go. So Jason took these photos of when Rotary came over to distribute the chips around before you could put up the swings. So here's a shot of the Rotary members, including our staff planner, Isaac Peterson. And in this picture, you can see Randy Gerard, Manager Gerard, Barb Wiegand, and in the back to the right, you can see Christy Black, who did the article for the Morning Journal. And this is our best picture here. This is a satisfied customer, client on the swing set. So thanks to Randy Gerard, his management, Rotary, and a couple of people from the rec committee, we now have a great swing set over there. Thank you. Just in time for community news.
Well done, well done. Group effort. Thanks, Mike, for sharing that. Anybody else wish to address the board? Sure, come on up to the podium. Name and address, please.
Can I introduce myself to each of you personally first and hand you my phone?
Sure.
Okay, I'm Melody Wagner. I'm competing for state representative. Nice to meet you, sir. John Thompson.
Thank you.
Sir.
They're slippery, different. I'm Lynn. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nice to meet you,
Nice to
Melody.
meet you, sir. Dave,
Thank you.
Boy, there's a bunch on this board, huh? Pete
Peter,
LaRue.
how are you
My
doing
pleasure,
there?
sir.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
great, sir.
Thank you.
Randy Gerard, my pleasure. And Roger Zappa, I
Hi.
believe I know you.
I believe you do.
There you go, sir.
Thank you.
Jared, it's good to see you again. I don't think I gave you one of those. Sir? Nice to meet you. Do anybody want any afterwards? They want I want these two, sure. Thank you. Can I just have a couple?
Yes,
minutes?
please.
I can speak loud enough. If I can just leave the mic alone, that's fine.
Well, it's part of the record, though. It'll
Oh.
go.
Okay.
Otherwise, the public won't get to hear you online.
Oh, okay. Like I said, I'm Melody Wagner. I put in my my hat in the ring back in 16. Didn't realize how broken every level of government was in every county that I was trying to compete for. Entities were broken too. Our family suffered a tragedy back in 13 moving here. And it was an undisclosed mold contamination in a actual state-inspected adult foster care home. And our family was greatly affected. It caused me to come out of private life and compete. I was a police officer when I was younger. I know I can do this job. My life got a little bit worse privately in 16. I took 17 off to heal. I've studied our government. I've lived in 2 other states where I was successful farming, and I was successful as a police officer. I am ready to serve. I'm a little nervous up here talking to you, but I am not establishment, and I will not take any PAC money or Political Action Committee money, as it's known, and nobody reached out to get me to do this. And I thank you for having me, and if you have any questions, you can see me afterwards. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Thanks for the introduction.
Well, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Any board member comment in relation to what we just heard? Okay.
Lynn,
Yes, sir.
on the Lions Field over there, you know,
Yes.
I just have to say that part of the township is over there is Dave Wiggins and Mike Springer. They're over digging those holes and make sure the units got up. Helped over there too, so I think we have to say that. Just let them know that we appreciate their help doing that.
Couldn't have done it without them. Okay. Next on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda, which tonight consists of approval of the regular meeting minutes of July 3rd and the closed session minutes of the same day. Bills payable in the amount of $138,607.01. Received committee reports and other reports tonight, including the Marquette Election Committee draft minutes of July 3rd, the Sheriff's Activity Report of June, as well as the Water Production Report of June, my report with the Marquette County Solid Waste Management Authority balance sheet. I thought you might find that interesting. Financial statements, ours from June. Correspondence not requiring board action is a qualifying statement from the state of Michigan. And unless there's something to be pulled out. Yes, Randy?
A move to accept the consent agenda as presented.
A motion and support, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
One comment I'll say is in the election committee draft minutes, there is a date that is wrong, and I will fix that. I think it was appoint workers for the November 7th of 2017 election, which is not correct. It'll be appoint workers for the August 7th, 2018. So that is actually fixed now, and it's actually online in the packet, so, but I will make sure that's fixed.
Okay, thanks. Then if there are no changes to the remainder of the agenda, I'd ask for a motion to approve that.
Support. Make the motion.
So moved and seconded, or whatever.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Conflicts of interest that we're aware of. Staff reports. Fire department. Yeah, share, both come up.
We're gonna double team you here. We'll be quick, though. Real quick, just the general business of what's going on with our fire department. Rob will give you more of the statistics, but I don't know how many of you have been aware of the paging problems we've been having. Maybe some of you have. Some of us have not been receiving pages, or they're unreadable. We're hoping that gets fixed this week. So that's part of the deal with our siren that some of us have discussed in the department. And our grant radios, we're almost completed there. We have all the equipment. We just need to do our end of it, which I will get with the manager on this week. We need to, our side of it will be purchasing hose, which we were planned on, but I will get with him on that. We have started another thing for the manager. We did start a Facebook page, or Jesse and I actually started a Facebook page for the department. John Wheeler is also administrator for the Facebook page. And again, we're, just because of the legalities or whatever, I don't know if we need to sign a release form for pictures and stuff like that. And we're planning on getting with the manager again on that later in the week. And last night we had a fun training with the Coast Guard, Chocolate and us, and we learned a lot, they learned a lot, and we really enjoyed ourselves. Any questions on those items?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I just had one comment.
Yeah.
I didn't
I'm sorry.
drop the ball with talking to Randy when you requested, but he was out of town. I haven't had a chance to. He just got back yesterday from.
Oh, yeah, I know, and I was just bringing it up, so just
Yeah.
that everybody's sort of aware
Right.
about
That's
the
fine.
problems we've been, you know.
Yeah, my understanding of the paging issue is it depends on which tower it's being paged from. So it's not an internal issue of ours, it's a communication issue from outside.
Good evening. As far as our, the fire marshal's report, we had a very busy month last month. We set a new record. We did 58 responses. Out of them 58 responses, one was a mutual aid structure fire, one was a mutual aid EMS call to Nagani City. All other EMS responses were 44 out of the 58, which is about 76% of our calls. We did normal training this month. And other than that, citations, warnings, pretty standard. We did a lot of parking warnings. If they're in a vehicle parked, we'll warn them about fire lane parking or in the process of writing a ticket if they come out. It's more of an educational process. Trying to get people not to park in the fire lanes. It's a big thing at the big box stores. Chief spoke about the joint water rescue training. Additionally, the fire siren, in an effort to alleviate some of the concern for our citizens with being bothered by the siren, we did readjust the times from 9 to 9. The time clock was a little off, we readjusted it, and hopefully will be less intrusive to our neighbors. Any questions for me?
Thanks for a great
Thanks.
report.
The fire department did send over a link to the ABC 9 and 10, I believe it was, that covered that event last night, so I did send out to board members, so you should have it in your email.
Sir?
I believe that before you can have a page, I think it has to go through the Randy and then the board before you put that out publicly.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, not necessarily the board, but certainly through administration and through 9 and through
I think
906
before you put
as
out
well.
Facebook out in public, you have to go through the manager.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Okay, Public Works, we don't have Kirk here. Randy, is there anything, you probably didn't have much time to talk to him today, even yesterday.
Nothing blew up, let's put it that way.
Anything we need to know about?
No, I talked very briefly with Kirk. You're right, yesterday was my first day back. I did talk briefly with him. There's really nothing of any significance, basically, that needs to come to the board level at this point. He'll be working on his CIP and responding to some concerns and questions that have been raised and get those answers back to you.
Thanks.
Glenn, is he working on the answers that were brought up at the last meeting?
Sort of, yes. Yep, we'll get something back from him. Assessing is not here this evening, but she will have a preliminary report for you on August 8th at that meeting, which I'm reminding everybody is a Wednesday night because of the election on the 7th. So our meeting will be on the 8th. And she's going to give us some resolutions to look at and then come back for approval, what is it, the 17th, I think, of August? She'll come to the second meeting with a report, but we will have something next meeting. Attorney report.
Been a fairly busy month. Just finished 2 stormwater management easements, one for Riverside's new facility and one for Menards. That's still a work in progress on nailing down some of the language. Prepared your ballot language for both the fire millage and the police millage, law enforcement millage proposals. I have just received from the Deputy Treasurer the actual figures for the delinquent personal property taxes. Letters will be going out tomorrow to the taxpayers affected. Those were completed today. We were able to finalize an agreement between 2 neighbors that there's been an ongoing zoning issue on regarding the fence placement, the features of the fence and so forth under the zoning ordinance. And we've also had a considerable correspondence back and forth regarding the parcel of land adjacent to our Wellfield Road that's for sale. And with the ball is now in the court of the prospective purchaser, they are supposed to get back to us with some additional information. I did receive some communication, I think, yesterday, indicating that they're still working on that and didn't want to leave the impression that we were, that they were overlooking that. And that pretty much. We've also got, that just arrived, I believe yesterday, a lease amendment proposal on one of our cell tower sites that I will be reviewing at Kirk Page's request. And that pretty much summarizes, in addition to the usual minor issues that come up on a day-to-day basis.
Any questions for Roger? Okay, thank you for that update. Community linkage is next. And tonight, we have consider sheriff's summary of cost savings through June 30th. If you remember, the first part of the year, we had actually last fall, the sheriff's contract was one of the topics we had through the budget season. And the sheriff did provide us with an update first part of the year, saying that some items he had already found a way to trim the budget a little bit. And then we asked if he could come back and give us an update halfway through the year. So this is where we are. Thanks for coming, Sheriff Seibert.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You do have a letter in your packet, too, with a little more of an update. Did you just want to talk about it, or were you looking for questions? Or
No, it's just
something you
basically
wanted to-
looking for questions and tell you some of the things that we have implemented in the township. Some of the things I wanted the officers to be seen more, so I asked them to have more contact with the public, traffic stops mainly, to get that red light showing in the corridor and in the different sections of the township. I did look into, I had some questions about the deputies leaving the area, leaving the township to help out in other, in other municipalities or leaving the area. And, we looked through dailies for the last couple of years and just couldn't find any incidents where the township car was leaving the jurisdiction of the township. So I'm not sure where that came from, and we just don't see it.
It was mostly the reciprocating calls, how many times is our truck or our car going out, and that helping back and forth.
Yeah. There weren't really that many, if any, that we could find on the dailies. And, interviewing each one of the officers that has worked for the township. And if they do it, it's a very short period and they're back in the township.
Dan?
And I believe that it works both ways, and I think it's to our advantage to have the other municipalities that do come out here to assist, probably more than our deputies go there. But what I've been watching and stuff, kind of looking at that.
Oh, absolutely. And,
yeah, I think we're to the good.
Yeah. Mark, we're very fortunate, and for the, and especially at nighttime, the lack of coverage that is really out there. All of us in Marquette County, all the 9 different agencies, we don't hesitate when someone calls and needs help, be it Marquette City or MSP or any of the local jurisdictions. Everyone helps each other because it is, we're so thinly staffed. So, yeah, and I talk with officers that I've had when I was with Chalkley who are downstate, where brown doesn't talk to blue, and I mean, it is a real issue. And I just have never seen it up here, so we're very fortunate that we all work together very well.
Dave?
I think the issue about the township car leaving the township wasn't so much a question of how many times do you do it or how often do you do it. It was more of a contract language question.
I see. Okay.
Nobody was suggesting that you do it in inordinate amount of time or that you don't do it when you're supposed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a contract language issue.
Okay.
Pete?
Greg, what is the speed limit in Trowbridge Park?
On which road is?
All of them inside.
Well, there's different definitions. There's residential, and that's how many homes, how far they are from each other. In order to have a traffic sign, you have to have it has to be, I believe, a mile long before the county will put a traffic sign on there. So in the residential area, you may not see, it's called a prima facie law. And if it falls under the definition of a residential where so many houses are within so long an area and so far from the roadway, then it would fall under prima facie, and it's a residential area 25. If it isn't posted, then it would be 55.
reason I asked, I was talking to the road committee one time, and I just asked them, I said, well, we don't put them in townships, or we don't try not to put them in the subdivision, because everyone would want one. And then a resident asked me, he said, well, the reason they don't stop anyone, because they don't know the speed limit. And this is the reason I'm coming up, that in our Trowbridge Park area, it's 25 miles an hour. Because of our roads are being taken care of, and they're all blacktop, it's a little bit smoother, people have a tendency to just speed up a little bit. So I just wanted to bring it out that it is 25 within the Trowbridge Park area.
In the residential.
All right,
Yeah, there is some confusion, because that also applies to Bishop Woods, Huron Woods, the specified residential areas. Where people get confused is because we have county primaries. As a for instance, Fair Avenue is a county primary, and that's posted at 35. The parts
And a
of Warner.
traffic study had to be done on that.
Correct.
Which determines the speed limit on those.
Right, and Warner from Ontario west is 35. That's a county primary to Ontario. Ontario then to Wright Street is county primary, and that's posted at a higher speed limit. You know, so Sheriff Seibert is correct. Unless there is something otherwise posted, it's prima facie 25. And certainly in all of the residential areas, it's 25 miles an hour.
Thank you.
Dan?
Greg, I just had one other question. On the reports from the officers that work in the township, one had 24 traffic stops with 24 warnings. How do they determine who gets a ticket? The other one was 45 traffic stops with 16 citations.
It's very subjective, and I had told the guys, I don't want to implement a quota, per se, that you will write so many tickets, and I said contacts, which is stopping them, and it could be for blinkers, it could be, not using your turn indicators, left to center, it could be for speed. So, I do leave it up to them, and honestly, the officers, with Chalkley, I hired those officers for many, many years, and I taught them my way. When I came into the sheriff, I adopted these kids, and it's different, and they do things, a different way than, we were a little more aggressive in Chalkley and wrote a lot of tickets. And so mainly speed. If they are tickets, it's usually a pretty good speed, 10 to 15 over or something like that. But otherwise, unless it's a careless type of driving, they're probably given a lot of warnings.
Thank you.
John?
I don't have a question, Sheriff. I have a compliment. I view our patrol as paying a real compliment to the community, because they routinely show the flag driving around. And just the fact that they're passing through the community, that has a great impact, I think. And that's deeply appreciated by the residents. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. My way of doing policing has always been community policing. Someone asked me, who is the best, you watch TV, and who's the best cop you've ever seen? And now you guys are old enough, but some of these kids here, I said it was Andy Griffin, for God's sake. He knew his community. He knew everyone in there. He, what was happening. And if you get a relationship like that, it doesn't get any better. There's a time where you can give warnings, and there's a time, but you have to have a feeling for your community. And that's what I try to get those guys, get out there and be seen. And that being seen doesn't mean being the bad guy. It could just stopping in businesses and talking or whatever, but be seen, be out there. So that's how I've been doing it.
Do you encourage them at all? I mean, if people are out in the yard working, raking, stuff like that, just to stop and BS for a few minutes?
Absolutely. Okay. No, that's all part of the game.
I like that.
Yeah. And the guys that we have are very, very good at it.
They're good.
Yeah.
Randy?
Greg, one of the issues that has been discussed at numerous budget sessions and over numerous years is the impact of the retail sector on patrol activities. And I know when you first came into office and you came and talked with the board, you indicated that you had a little bit of a different philosophy, and we're going to be addressing that differently. Can you tell the board how that's worked out so far?
Well, the one thing that I did change, it took about 6 months, but to keep the officers on the road, is the jail staff now does the fingerprinting, or which usually took about 30 to 45 minutes. There's a whole slew of questions. There's fingerprinting. There's a whole, evaluating medically and all this type of thing. So all the officers, they're basically bringing in, and then the jail staff is doing the booking. So that's one thing that's been a real big help. The other thing is they're not lodging on the retail frauds unless they're repeat offenders or the value. It depends on the value. And speaking with the prosecutors, the value of the stuff stolen, it may have gone up some. So they're writing tickets for them to appear in court. So instead of having to take them in even, that is cutting down a lot of the time too.
Have any of the retail establishments stepped up to take more responsibility?
They do. When the officer gets there, the major ones, they have their own security people. They have a report, they have everything, basically giving them all that information and holding on to the person. Or sometimes they do take off and there's a small foot chase or something like that. Some of them just let them go, get license plates and any information. We follow up on that. But their staff is doing a lot of the work, the reports, because basically it's not the officers who witnessing the event, that the shoplifting event. It is the staff. So we rely heavily on their reports, and so is the prosecutor.
So I don't know that if the board chooses to take some kind of an action now. I think this was more of an update to see where we're going to be in the budget session. You're probably aware we have a resolution we're going to look at tonight too.
I look forward to
That's part of our
hopefully the
funding,
millage
to help that out.
will do, and anything I can do to help, get that going, I'd be happy to talk, or anything you need.
A question, I guess more because I don't recall how that went at budget, but I thought we had set the budget at 60 hours, and then we continued at an 80-hour pace until the July report. I'm just wondering if I've got that correct, or if that went a different way.
We approved 80, I believe. We had it at 60 and we approved it at 80 until this update, if we wanted to do something
I
different.
think we should go back and check that motion, because I think there was a motion for 60 hours way back when we had our budget
See if we
discussions.
had our log ready, we could log. We're working on logging the motions.
Mhm.
So, we can do that. Like I said, I didn't think there was going to be any action tonight, but if somebody wanted to do something, that's fine. Randy?
Just one last question. We are going into the budget cycle. We're just about to start that. We're closing out June right now, and as soon as that gets closed out, we'll be sending out the budget documents to the department heads. But Sheriff, is there what's your forecast for the second 6 months of the year? Is there anything generating or developing that you think might be of concern?
Not to my knowledge. Steve Kangas, the captain, is the one who actually does that type of thing, and he hasn't expressed. Now 19 will be a different thing because of the cost of the wages and benefits and that type of thing, but we had held back 2018 and didn't charge for that, so 19 no, but for the rest of the year I don't foresee any future increases.
Will you be able to have a percent idea for next year, or some kind of number that we can?
We're just starting, and within the next month and a half, I'd say.
Okay, that's where we are too.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe sometime during our discussions, whether it's a work session or a board meeting, we can, if we have questions, we can
Please.
have you back, or
Absolutely.
the captain,
Yeah.
whichever works easier for you.
Yeah, be happy to.
We'll be doing that end of August, probably the 1st of September, really looking at it.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, appreciate it. Always good to have more information. 8, Policy discussion, consideration, and development. Tonight has a majority of our items to discuss. First of all, consider manager's performance evaluation. It's that time of year again. It's in your packet, the explanation, the instructions, and the evaluation itself. Randy, you usually email those? Are you gonna?
Yeah, I will, I can send out an electronic copy, and I can put a paper copy in your box by tomorrow. And that will be due, we got 3 weeks to the end of the month, so if you can get that to me by August 1st, that would be great. We'll tally it, and usually myself and the supervisor go over it with the manager, and then it's brought to either the first or second meeting in August for presentation to the board, and that's about it. Usually we've done this later, but the way that the contract reads for the manager, it should be done this time of year because it just meets the timelines better for his contract. So that's why I put it here. The contract reads it has to be done by September 30th every year. But my recommendation is to have it done by August of every year. So that's why we have it now. And it's pretty self-explanatory. We did it last year. And the evaluation period will be from August 1st of last year to the 31st of July of this year, so.
I'm just gonna say that as a reminder. So it's just this year. Any questions? Okay. Consider fire department apparatus ballot proposal. You will also see, and there is, I believe, just one word change. Roger, correct me if I'm wrong.
Actually, 2 word changes. There were only in the fire one.
Right.
There was kind of an inconsistency between the resolution and the ballot language, so the word equipment was eliminated, and the word apparatus was added in the title.
Oh, the title, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're both extremely minor. The content of it is essentially the same. It's more of a syntax issue.
So in your packet, number 1 is where I saw it.
Nope.
Marquette Township Board resolves to present to the electors of Marquette Township at the November 6, 2018 election a fire truck and apparatus replacement millage. That's what it was changed to. So it's not in the packet, but all he added was "and apparatus."
The packet was put together and distributed before that change was
Right,
made.
that was last Thursday. Roger had time to think about it. So,
So you're changing the definition?
well, if you remember, and I emailed him back after I got this, and if you remember, we wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to be just for hoses, or, I don't want to say just, that's not right, but for hoses and equipment. The idea is if we need to replace a truck. So I just felt that apparatus needed to be in there instead of equipment. And then we kind of went back and forth on both words or not. So then this was Roger's, I think it came yesterday. You sent the update, fire truck and apparatus replacement millage.
So that'll also change the wording on the actual ballot language then too?
It does, and what was taken out was the word equipment for clarification, and technically there is no legal definition of what equipment is or even what apparatus is. So what a court would do if there was a controversy on what this millage could be used for, a court would have to determine it by usually using a dictionary definition, and if you look up the definition of apparatus, I looked in several dictionaries. One of its primary definitions is equipment for a particular purpose. So in typical attorney fashion, using the words apparatus and equipment was really redundant. So we took out the word equipment out of the ballot language and out of the resolution as well.
John, I think you were first.
Move for approval of the ballot language as amended.
Yeah, and I'll second that.
Do we have to say when it's gonna be played, what?
No, because I have the correct ballot language, and that'll be going to the, there's only one thing that was changed, and Roger explained what it was, so it's minor.
Does the motion have to say what election it's gonna be on, or?
It does say November 2018 ballot.
I was just talking about the motion itself. No.
I'll just do what I did for the library one,
Okay.
because it's all in the same one, so.
So just so the public is clear, because some people may not actually get the packet and look at this, they might just be watching it on YouTube. This is a millage proposal to have a 0.6 of a mill added to the ballot in November.
Let me just read it, Lynn. I can read
It's a
that.
long one.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I was going to say, really, to generate a little extra revenue for fire trucks. That's what we're thinking. When we have $1 million or $1.5 million piece of equipment that we're going to need in the future, it's pretty hard to write a check for that. We don't have a methodology in the fire department based on their assessment of having a savings account to put a down payment even on, much less to pay the whole thing off. So this is the reasoning for asking the public for a small amount of millage to put that money aside and start saving it for some equipment or apparatus. Randy?
Yes, that's true. The fact of the matter is that we currently have a special assessment that funds the fire department, and that is converted to a millage, but it's not a millage, it's a millage amount. It's a special assessment. Special assessment legislation does not allow for any kind of a carryover fund to the following year, basically. So what the board is asking is, rather than having to go out and to finance a piece of equipment when something occurs or it needs to be replaced, the 0.6 mil would be set into a separate fund as a regular millage that would carry from year to year and build from year to year to give the capability of replacing a piece of equipment without having to incur interest. So it's basically a long-term savings, cost-reducing option.
Thank you. Randy?
And I'll read what the ballot language will be, and it is, shall the authorized millage for the Charter Township of Marquette be increased by a new millage in the amount not to exceed 0.6 mil? That's 60 cents for every $1,000 of taxable property value for a period of 6 years from 2018 to 2023, both inclusive, for the purpose of replacing aging fire trucks and apparatus. The estimated revenue the township will collect in the first year, if the millage is levied, is $147,862.27.
Bernie?
When does the Headley Amendment enter into this?
If it was levied, if it was voted on this year but not levied until next year, then there would be a mandatory rollback. But then we've got the whole issue of whether or not there is any Headley rollback the last couple of years in any event. There have been a couple of zero rollback years in there. But when it's levied this year, assuming it's approved, it would be levied at the full amount in 2018, on the December 2018 tax bills, with no rollback.
When you're saying that, put money aside, but this is very important because we have a very, when it says aging fire trucks, they're getting very old, and I don't have my report with me, but the repairs are coming up, the lines are drying up, they're rusting and stuff like that, so it's very important that we plan for it, because if something happens, we have to buy a truck, we're gonna end up paying interest and everything like this, and so I think it's very important that people know that we do have aging, but in very good condition. You know, I don't wanna say they're falling apart, but this is very good planning for the fire department.
Anything else? I'm going to ask for a roll call. Randy?
It will be anyway, because there's a resolution, but Trustee Marks.
Yes.
Clerk Rattari is yes. Trustee LaRue?
Yes.
Trustee Wiegand?
Yes.
Trustee Everson,
Yes.
Treasurer Johnson,
Yes.
and Supervisor Durant.
Yes.
Motion carries. I will get that done and off to the county tomorrow.
Okay. So that is just to put the millage on the ballot, just so the public knows. Consider sheriff funding ballot proposal. Kind of the same idea. Right now, we're contributing to the supplemental sheriff's contract, which is separate from the service that the sheriff does provide the county already. The township has extra hours, which is what we were just talking about. This would help supplement what we're paying for that extra service without it having to come from the general fund. And the question is to levy 0.4 mils for 6 years also, to help take that edge off, so that we have general fund monies available toward operations. Did you want to read this one too, Randy?
Yeah, the ballot language will be, shall the authorized millage for the charter township of Marquette be increased by a new millage in the amount not to exceed 0.4 mil, which is 40 cents for every $1,000 of taxable property value for a period of 6 years from 2018 to 2013, both inclusive, for the purpose of providing partial payment for the supplemental law enforcement and patrol coverage within Marquette Township over and above those basic services otherwise provided by the Marquette County Sheriff's Department. When the current contract with the Marquette County Sheriff's Department expires on December 31st, 2018, the estimated revenue the township will collect in the first year if the millage is levied is $98,547.85.
Okay. John?
Move.
Second.
Move for the approval of the sheriff, or funding ballot proposal language as presented.
We definitely have a second.
I just have a
Comments?
question, Randy. On the last statement where it says expires December 31st, 2018, I have a question mark at the end of there.
Yeah, that's
That's the end of the question.
It's asking a question. Should
was the
this
question.
happen?
Okay.
Yep.
That's the question.
And again, this is not to deal as to whether or not we have sheriff services. What the intent is to free some of the money that's currently going from the general fund to fund that service, to build the fund balance back up that was depleted by the dark store issue.
And other things.
Other tax reductions, correct.
Dave?
That millage amount, that 98,547.85, that is just about 50% of what the contract currently is.
Yes, it's a little less than that. I think this year it was 196, I believe it was.
Anything else?
Roll call.
Trustee Marks,
Yes.
Trustee LaRue.
Yes.
Trustee Wiegand,
Yes.
Trustee Everson,
Yes?
Treasurer Johnson.
Yes.
Secretary is yes, and Supervisor Durant.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. All right, the next four are actually kind of together. The board had a work session last week to discuss policy governance, policies number 3.6 and 3.7. And 4.2 got kind of pulled into it, even though wasn't scheduled until August, but just part of the discussion. And that is on YouTube if anybody would like to watch that meeting. I believe it was an hour and a half, if I'm not mistaken.
No, actually, I do have the recording that is not on YouTube. I do have a
Oh,
recording.
that's right.
Yeah.
You didn't have a recorder. Thanks for correcting that. Okay, but you can come and pick that up. We have it on CD, right, that they can?
If they would like, yeah, I can make it available. I do have that recording.
So basically, the idea is we're reviewing the policies all year long that the board has set up when we established policy governance the first part of this year. And this is the one that's recommended to discuss now. And the 3.6 is the supervisor's role in the board's process. And I did give you the attachments of the duties, and they kind of ended up in a little funny order in here. I didn't think to tell Andrew which direction to put them in. But the supervisor's one is the first one. Then it covers the duties of elected department head roles, which is the clerk and the treasurer. Those attachments are also in there. But I believe next month we talk about the trustees. But in our discussion of our responsibilities, it was a really good discussion. We talked about a couple of things, and I gave you some printouts. I gave you a, I kind of hold it up for John, but that's not that important. It's more of an internal administrative thing, just a way of keeping track of our motions for the year. A few times that we've been having to look for things. Well, who made that motion? When was it effective? Or did the article get published? Or what was said? And was it a motion or just a consensus? And in the discussion last week, we started saying, maybe we need a log of motions, that it's a quick reference. So I went back and just grabbed these. I went to the website, I went to board agendas, or board minutes, and just cut and pasted. It was pretty easy, and I just put it in a spreadsheet. So these are the actual motions. And the idea is, I'm thinking kind of the clerk, don't hit me now, being the correspondence and communication expert he is, would just, when this happens, just make a note of it, put it in the computer. He can have the original to this, who directed the act, because it isn't necessarily just the board. It could be a motion to direct the superintendent of public works to act on a particular whatever project, or get a quote, or whatever. It could be to direct the planning commission to take some kind of an action, or do a study, or whatever. Or in these cases, they're all here. The first one is to approve the sheriff's contract. Oh, there you go, Dave, at 80 hours of service.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah. See, I didn't read this as well because I was just cutting and pasting. This is the actual motion at the January 2nd meeting. The second one is the My Deal purchasing program, budget reductions, then in the 16th meeting. So these are the exact ones. We had a little problem with the website, so I got as far as June 19th meeting. I said it's not hard to do, it's just a cut and paste. Then if there's an advertisement that needs to be placed, we can put down that date, and then just have it. We were talking about something else too this afternoon, and I thought, gee, if we had last year's log, we could look. So this was part of our discussion with duties. The other thing was, actually, what's this other page I had? I thought I gave you 2 pages, didn't I?
This is just basically an action item. It's action items, really,
Yeah,
which isn't, like I said, I could do this. It's not that hard.
yes,
But,
it doesn't take long. So the second one second sheet I gave you refers to policy 4.2. And we got into, again, that the responsibility of each one of the roles. The manager's position came up because he's the one that we have to point our finger at no matter what we're doing. He's our employee, whereas the rest of the staff is his employees. So I gave Susan Radwan a call and said that we're just thinking how this fits into policy governance. Do we need a policy? Not so much thinking of Randy, but the position. Again, at some point, the new board or the new manager, we didn't want to lose this process of keeping track of the motions. So with that, she wrote up, let the board, okay, so the prelude is the township manager shall not, in this case, let the board be unaware of actions taken in fulfillment of board motions that are operational in nature or failure to take action on relevant motions. So, and that Randy brought up today, well, then the planning commission kind of really needs this too, to keep track of, because it's not Randy's responsibility. They're a body of, in and of themselves, like the DDA would be, or the board review, or the, well, not so much them, even,
ZBA.
ZBA. So they almost all need their own, when you're talking about accountability, you know, their, what would be the word? Their, not clarification, to know that whatever motion that they did was enacted, that it was done.
Yeah, they're documenting record
Right.
for the board.
Yeah, for the action. Does that make sense, Randy?
Well, like, for example, tonight, the two motions we made previous, the manager isn't gonna do, I'm gonna do those. So he really has, you know, the manager has no authority on those, because those are a clerk's act, you know. He can follow up that I did them, but he's got really no authority to really report back to the board on that. That's my responsibility.
Right.
So, I think it's whoever the motion is directed at, or whoever's doing that, needs to make sure it's done and followed up on.
So we almost have to, this policy, if we were to put this into place, would just apply to the manager, wouldn't apply to anything that the planning commission did or anything else. It'd just be the motions directed to have him.
Anything that would be directed for the manager to do, you're correct. And really, like I said, there isn't, I chatted with Randy, I think it was yesterday, and we talked about this, and it really isn't, I mean, we really haven't had an issue with this. We had one issue a year ago, but it was resolved, and really, I don't think this is a big problem. I mean, a log of motions is fine, but if it's like a planning commission motion, then I'm gonna have to track down the planning commission and say, well, did you guys do this? Or if it's a superintendent of public works, now, Kirk, did you do this? You know, I'm gonna have to be kind of the teacher here, or the principal.
Well, you'd follow up on any of the motions the board would make, though. That would still follow to you, right?
Yeah, however, when we direct the public works superintendent to execute a document or what have you, then it kind of falls away from the board, and it's up to him to follow up on that action. I can actually, you know, like I said, I can be the intermediary and say, well, Kirk, did you get that done? And if it isn't done, why not, you know?
Isn't that the manager's
I was
position?
gonna say, yeah, then it would still fall to the manager because he's his employee. But with the planning commission, that's where you might,
Well, any board, any committee or board outside of this, I really, it's not really, I would think I do keep the records and the minutes, but I really don't check on their
not the
motions.
policeman. Randy?
There are a couple of procedures in place currently. You know, as of, for instance, when the board, when we went through the process to amend the boundaries of the DDA, there were various steps that had to occur that we walked the board through with documentation and various public hearings, and then ultimately the board had a first and a second reading on the amended ordinance. I was moving that through, so I published that ordinance. And basically what happens when we publish an ordinance, we publish it in the Mining Journal, which is basically the law. You publish in the local newspaper, basically print media. They publish it, and then they send us an affidavit of publishing, which we file. There's a file of it. So we have the ordinance, and we also have the affidavit that it was filed. I think the issue that originated this discussion was the ORV ordinance that was passed a year ago, June of 2017. I had a request at another meeting. I had a request for a copy from another community who was working on an ORV ordinance, if they could take a look at our ordinance. So when I came back to get it, I found final drafts, but I could not find a final published copy. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Whether it's misfiled or whether it's filed somewhere else, the board took a formal action on June the 6th of 2017. So I took it upon myself just to make sure I published it again. I put it in the paper in July. So we now have an affidavit that it's been filed, it's in the proper file, and it's in effect. It's been in effect since June of 2017. But, so that was a glitch, and I'm not sure where that's at and how that happened. The Planning Commission moved that forward to the board. That particular ordinance didn't come from staff, it came from Planning Commission. And when the board adopted it, my presumption was that Planning Commission was going to go through and publish that. They may have, they may not have, but at any event, it was caught and it was corrected. So, I mean, we do have a process in place to do that. That particular one kind of fell through the cracks. We did the same thing with the camping ordinance that the board just approved 4 weeks ago, I think it was, 4 to 6 weeks ago. That was published. We've got the affidavit, so it's all set. I think the simple thing, at the end of every meeting, the clerk recaps all of the motions from that meeting. And I would suggest that maybe the best way to address it is at that time, there's a confirmation of who's delegated to follow up on that motion at each meeting, and then you have it in the minutes, who's responsible. And then we can log it, however you want to log it, it can be logged. But then you've got a double track. You've got an action, you've got a repeat of the action that was taken, and who's responsible to follow it up. And then you're logged to see if that occurred.
You put in there report by a certain time,
In which,
reporting back.
following you mean
When you
reporting
say
back?
report back, do you put a time in there? You want some?
Oh, yeah, there's a time frame. I mean, if you pass an ordinance, it has to be, it's not effective until you publish it, and then it's effective either upon publishing or 30 days or 60 days after, depending on what type of an ordinance it is. So it certainly would refine that process, and then we would have multiple checks basically to ensure that that was done, because you'd have the publication, you'd then have the affidavit, and if it didn't appear, you could go back to the log from whatever meeting and find out why it wasn't done or who was responsible.
And that's actually easy for me. I can, like, when I'm going through the motions tonight, I can actually, when we're talking about the ballot proposals, that'll be the clerk's job.
Typically, well, then you'll see it tonight, because I did, I was gone last week, so I did my manager's report yesterday and today. I finished it up and put it at your places, but it does have follow-up on those ordinances. But typically, if the board directs me to generate a letter or whatever, it's in your next packet, just so you can read what was generated and know that it was done. So whatever procedure the board wants to follow, we can certainly modify and follow that procedure to make you more comfortable that those things are being done and to ensure that there is a double check.
Dave?
I think when this whole discussion started up, the work session last week, the intent is to simply have a log of motions and action items so that anybody who wanted to know any information could go back and look and find it by date as to when the motion or action item was moved or made by the board, and check and make sure that it was actually done. And that was it wasn't to hold anybody else more accountable. It was just to have a record in one place where you could go to find out if that stuff was done. And I would think you'd start that at the board level. And if it works out fine and it's an easy system to do, then it would just be a matter of adding to the rules and responsibilities for the other committees that they would do the same thing. There's no reason that everybody can't just keep a log of what they're doing. And a simple place to find it is just a log of motions and action items. And that could be very, very beneficial from a time standpoint, because now if there's a question that comes up about, when was such and such an ordinance passed? There are two ways you find that. Either you go back through the agendas and find it, or you go to the ordinance book and look it up, but you have to have a rough idea of the date and the timeline, because when an ordinance is passed, its ordinance number is the date of passage. For instance, if you passed an ordinance tonight, the ordinance number would be 071418. That would be the ordinance. And if you did multiples, it would be -1, -2, -3 on that same general number. Unless those ordinance books are kept up every meeting, you may not find it in the ordinance book. Then you have to go back to the agendas to determine which meeting it was, and then look at that packet or the minutes for that meeting.
And we're not the only government that has issues with this. I mean, the clerk produces minutes of the meeting, which is the log of the motions, and that's really what he has to do, or he or she has to do. And I can see a log of the motions, but there is, last year, I did talk to the board about putting some technology into this and tying your meetings to the actual motions. So you can actually do a search of the motions, and the video pops up of the meeting when you search this stuff. And, I did not pursue it because of our budget issues this last year, but I probably will again pursue it this year because I think we're to the point now, and it's not going to help in the past because we can't do much there, but going forward, it's going to help because, for instance, if we're talking about a water or wastewater or what have you, whatever the subject is, you just type it in, and any hit that subject has comes up in a nice, easy format, and the video and the minutes and the agenda comes out for that item. And it really keeps tracking things a lot easier, in my opinion. So maybe, we'll pursue that this year and maybe try it for a year and see how it goes. But this is always the struggle we have, is trying to record keep. It's the technology age is, we have so much information, it's hard to keep track of sometimes.
We kill a lot of trees. Dave?
In the interim of spending a bunch of money on a program, I think the supervisor's suggestion that if it's not too much trouble, the clerk would keep track of that. He does it all anyway now.
Let's just copy and paste, basically.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of keeping track of whose action item it was, or the motions take care of themselves because everybody knows where they're going. And it's just a matter of following up to know that they were actually done or when they were done.
And actually, a lot of them, are done the next day. It's not.
And I don't think we need to spread it down and do it to the rest of the committees until we actually see if it works or not.
Okay. One of the requests of the board, though, was to have a policy. I'm kind of thinking we don't need one then.
It's actually kind of under the clerk's policy now, so I don't think we need to generate a new policy.
Okay, that sounds good.
Policy governing the policy.
Yeah, that's okay, but that was the discussion.
This could
No,
be
it's
the
not
first.
okay.
This could be the first one on the top of the action items list.
Okay, that sounds good. So I will finish that spreadsheet up, get it up to date, and transfer it over to the clerk. We had those 3 things on there to follow up from the meeting. That was one of them. Okay, anything else on that? Okay, so that's D, E, and F. The other thing was to schedule a work session for township operations discussion. So again, in the midst of this, we kind of discovered that we wanted to talk about staffing, scheduling, storage, whether that's internally or a building, the office structure. We talked about safety, putting the departments together, some of the departments together. So we wanted to schedule a work session to that end. So what's your pleasure, gang? Do you want to do that like right now, or in the maybe part of our budget discussion, or if there's information you want the manager to gather before the discussion? Randy?
I think this one would be more prudent to be done in the budget sessions because it's all going to require money.
Right.
And we don't know how much money we have until the sessions happen. So, and the manager will have an idea where the budget is, and he can either say, we have money for this, or we don't.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's more prudent to have it during those discussions, and then probably even more prudent to have it after the election even.
I was just going to say, until we know where we are with the general fund, we can't really do a whole lot. Maybe this is part of our 20 discussion, next year. I don't know. Who had their hand up? Dave?
I would think that we're not looking to work it out at a board level. We are looking to categorize the questions on what kind of things we would like considered, and we'd like the manager to come back with some recommendations if there are any out there.
That's what I was thinking.
would
Just
sooner
chew on it.
see that done sooner rather than later, so that if there's something that is feasible, then you have an idea where you're headed before the budget gets here, and you can tag some numbers to it. But if you're not working the process out until we're doing budget, it's really kind of late to put it into a 19 budget.
Because there's roughly half a dozen items we wanted to talk about. Maybe we only do one, or put only one toward the budget this year.
Well, I would think that you would just, if you want to talk about some of these different directions you want to look at, and from the work session, nobody really decided what you want to do. We'd just like to explore the options of what's feasible and what works per the union agreements, what works per where the money comes from agreements, and what's going to give us a better level of service and could possibly cut down on some of the overtimes. All those options we just want to kick around and see if there's something out there that we could explore. And I don't think it's up to this board to decide which one of those, because that's way too much hands-on for a board member. That's more something a manager should do a little research on and make some recommendations. And I guess I would just soon see a earlier rather than later work session on that. So not that you expect to turn it around at that work session and have an idea, but just so that the board members have an opportunity to express their opinions so that we can give some direction to the manager.
Randy?
But under policy governance, out of that work session, we'll have to make a policy, or, because remember, we can't micromanage the manager. We can't do that. So we have to make a policy if we want to move forward on some of these items. It would be more of a policy making.
Well, we're not
don't
to
need
the
a
point of
policy.
policy yet. We're just asking for some options so that he has an understanding what the options is. We're not even close to adopting a policy on this.
Yeah, because these are wide-reaching.
Yeah.
If you're talking about staffing and how it's scheduled, second shifts or not, putting departments together if we need storage or.
And, well, we all sit around and talk about this, but we don't really know what we can do and what we can't do.
We don't want to waste his time looking at, okay, how much is the budget this much, but if it's not going to work. It's really not high on our priority, but there are things that we'd like to know and try to get in. So I agree with Dave, we don't wait till we have it, and we don't need a policy for it until we find out where we're going with it.
Well, that's why I said we may only want to do one of these things out of the six. We may
Yeah.
not want to. But until we talk about it, we knew we couldn't talk about it at that work session.
Well, it's just a matter of sitting down with the manager as a board and talking about it and exploring some options, giving him some ideas so that he can go out and present some thought-out options for us to consider. And at that point, and I'm thinking we're a month, 2 months down the road from that, if you want to consider a policy, then you're considering a policy change.
So we want to try to do this month, next month, Randy?
It would probably be a lot easier because we're about to start the 2019 budget process. If there was a recording or a video of what the discussion was that I could listen to so I know what the ideas are that you have, I'm going to be starting to meet with the department heads on budgets here in a week, to put some information together to address the questions that the board has, basically, so you can have those before we even get into the budget process to determine what's feasible, what's not feasible going forward.
I don't know that we were that specific. I think these were generalities.
Well, but if you're talking about combining departments, what departments? Maybe for instance, if you're talking about combining enterprise funds and general funds, that isn't going to work, because you can't combine those two. They're not compatible. They're totally separate operations, so totally separate budget process. If you're talking about combining shifts, to go to a second shift, that's strictly a staffing question, strictly staffing. So I mean, some of those things are pretty easy to answer, pretty easy to address if we know what they are going into the budget process. We can have answers for the first budget session.
I think by him listening to it, he'll get the
Yeah.
understanding of what we're trying to say.
As a for instance, if you wanted to add like a second shift on Public Works, we can build a couple of different budget scenarios as we're going through the budget in terms of, if you want to have, one person working with somebody else on call, however you want to structure that, we can have some numbers and parameters on how that might work, what hours of coverage, those kinds of things. for, when the first sessions you have is you have Public Works, Fire, whatever, come in and basically present to you what their view of the budget is at the first session before you actually get into numbers. So, I mean, we could probably answer some of those questions for you within the next week or two in terms of giving you an idea, and then the board would be in a better position for your first meeting in August to say, we want to do X or we want to do Y. Work session, no work session, budget process, whatever. I think that's what Trustee Wiegand was getting at, is, some of those we can have some very preliminary information pretty quickly.
I do have that recording. I can get that to you, Randy.
Okay. Yeah, it was just, I wasn't there being out of town, so, okay.
Start with that. Oh, Ernie?
I think following up on Dave, I think just putting together some of our thoughts so that we can get to the manager, and some of it may be something that can't be done. Or then also some of them, you're gonna have some budget implementations that you're gonna have to be concerned with. But it's a matter of putting them on paper and what direction that we had talked about, and just go forward in that too, so.
Okay.
I would just be interested in hearing the manager's idea if he listens to the tape from the work session and just what his thoughts on what we're talking about are.
Okay, we can bring this
Do
back
that.
to the next agenda then, and
Yeah, there's time in August to have work session too, so.
okay.
Yeah, actually, what I would do is I would pull together Public Works, I would pull together, whatever entities are involved in the discussion, pull them together, listen to the tape at the same time, so we can, all have the concept of where we're going and what we can get back to you for your first meeting in August.
So we'll defer this item to the first meeting in August.
I hate saying that we're talking about the first meeting in August already.
August 8th.
That's amazing.
That'll pertain to 8G. Okay, sounds good. Anything else on that?
Yeah, I'm glad we're gonna have a work session.
Yeah. Okay, consider supervisor's appointment of new fire chief, 8H.
I have a comment on that.
Sure.
I think we're a little bit premature on this, and I would like to have a work session on this particular item. I have some questions about reading in some of our material there that who is our personnel director? Is that Randy?
Manager, yep.
Okay. In some of the readings that the manager brings up would make that decision, not the supervisor. And in the other case, I see that the supervisor makes it. So I'd like to have our attorney look at a couple of these things. Who's the personnel, who brings it up? I would like to see about deadlines. We had deadlines. Were all of them put in before the deadline? Did we interview everyone? And I think Roger Zappa and also Aaron Graves could help us on some of those questions that we have. And I know Aaron Graves just went through some of this stuff, so. But I think we should have in another reading, I forget, was that the Red Book or whatever, but interview should be done in the open with the board there. That was in there. And I would just like to have our attorney, before we go any farther, take a look at this and get back to us and to see that we're doing the right thing. Did we have deadlines? Yes, we did. Marquette Mine Journal, we ran it 3 times. The deadline was March 23rd. No, we had a problem with the other ones, but we're not considering anyone from outside, so the deadline wouldn't make any difference. But, we've been through this thing so many times, and we let things go by, and just it's easy to do it. But, we spent thousands of dollars correcting wrong things that we've been done in the past. And I think we should stop and just get this thing done right the first time. So I'd like to have somebody look at that before we make any decisions.
Okay. In general law township, the entire board appoints the fire chief. Let me just say this. In a charter township, the supervisor has the authority to appoint the subject, and it's under concurrence of the board. We're a charter township, so that falls to the supervisor. It's also in our personnel manual from the fire department, that the personnel makes or the supervisor makes the appointment with board concurrence. The board has had access to all the information on all of the candidates. All of the processes were,
Are they all qualified? Did they meet the deadline?
all of the processes were followed to the T.
No, they weren't.
Pete, this is my appointment. I did it.
I'm
by the
not
letter.
arguing that, but did we follow the process?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Now Roger can address it because he's been a part of this.
The appointment or the hiring of just a general employee is much different than the hiring of a fire chief. There's a specific statute. It's found at MCL 42.13, and that provides that the township board in each charter township, which Marquette Township is one of only 2 charter townships in Marquette County, shall have power to provide for and establish and maintain a fire department and authorize the supervisor or the township superintendent, if one has been appointed, and Marquette Township does not have a superintendent, so it's authorizing the supervisor to appoint, subject to the approval of the board, a township fire chief and other such firefighters, other provisions. So the question then becomes, has Marquette Township Board authorized the supervisor to do that under the statute? And the answer to that is found in the fire department personnel policy, because the fire department does not have the authority to hire its own employees, to buy its own trucks or other vehicles, to appoint a chief. So, or even adopt a personnel policy. This board has adopted a personnel policy for the fire department. If you look at policy A12 in the fire department personnel policy, it says, the chief shall be appointed by the township supervisor with township board concurrence. So there again, you have not only the state statute that indicates that for a charter township, the supervisor has the authority to make the appointment, subject to the board approval thereof, but it's also been authorized by the township board's action in approving and adopting that personnel policy. That, I might add, is different from a general township, such as, well, any of the other townships in Marquette County, with the exception of Chocolate, because the others are all general townships, and that duty of appointing a fire chief falls to the township board in those types of townships, but that does not apply in a charter township. So that is the process that is to be followed.
Randy, would you go through some of the processes that we did? I used the fire chief, the past fire chief, and the manager, who's the HR, and background checks were done, matrices were done on qualifications, interviews were done, phone calls. You want to step the board through that process?
Yeah. First of all, basically, the supervisor is by statute the personnel director of the township unless they delegate that to a manager or a superintendent, basically. So my authority as personnel director comes by delegation from the supervisor out of that statutory authority. So my responsibility is to hire all township staff and supervise all township staff with the exception of the fire chief and the assessor. The assessor is a separate appointment as well, but in planning commission, the supervisor appoints planning commissions, again, subject to the vote of the board. The process that we followed on this recruitment is that the board authorized us to go forward and advertise for a chief. We filed advertisements with local and national publications And Trustee LaRue is correct. The original advertisement had a deadline of March 23rd for applications. Unfortunately, the two national publications didn't publish the ad until March 20th, which left no time for anybody to respond. They were way behind the curve, and it was almost a month later than what they told us they would be publishing it. So we re-advertised with no deadline, and at that time we had additional candidates. At the first ad that were only locals, we had no local applicants at all, other than internal. We had 2 internal applicants. The second ad that ran generated 9 more candidates, and they were all from out of the area. Being out of the area, we did not necessarily do interviews. We did Skype contacts with them over Skype to verify their documentation and their information that was submitted. One candidate who had applied on his own came to Marquette and looked at the community and met with members of this department as well as other community members on his own. It was not an interview, but what Trustee Durant is referring to with the matrix is every time I do a hire, I create a matrix for that position that takes personality out of it and goes strictly to documented requirements and documented skills and abilities on a numerical basis that comes down with a point total, basically, that ranks candidates. And I did that with these candidates as well. So that was the process that I presented to the supervisor for consideration with the applications and with the matrix, since it is a supervisor's appointment.
So I did not take this process lightly at all. I have hired and fired many people in my career in many different jobs and in my own business. And I know what's required. What I had to adapt to was the statutory requirements and the union regulations that would apply. And other than participating in the interview process, the board had access to, manager and I he put it together in our discussion, put a booklet together with all of the applications and the background, and I believe a couple of the board members took that and read it. And total, I think we had 13 candidates, and we kind of weeded them down. Dan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, tonight is the first time that I was ever informed that we were allowed to look at the applicants.
You got an email, I believe, last week? Not sure.
About 2 weeks ago, I believe it was.
I didn't. I know there's been some glitches with emails in the past, but this is the first I had heard that we were allowed to look at any of the candidates.
Well, that was something that we offered. It wasn't required that I know of. We just thought maybe it would be a good idea, because this isn't something.
I concur. I think it's a good idea. I brought the subject up to you a week or 2 weeks ago, and I was basically told that I didn't have any say in the matter.
You really
period.
don't, other than voting.
Well, I'm not going to vote
After
on
my
something that I
recommendation.
have never seen any of the candidates, what the applications are, what their qualifications are. I do know the 2 internal candidates, but any of the others, I don't know. I've never seen anything on them, or was I ever offered to see anything on them. I would like to see before I make any vote. So I will not concur until I see them.
Or discuss. Ooh.
Roger, can you clarify this?
I am not a party to the types of emails that the board gets, so
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
You'll vote without any discussion on it, the question is.
Well, that's not a legal issue, really.
But it is in the sense that the board isn't responsible to be part of the hiring process in this position.
The supervisor has the appointment authority, and that's blatantly clear. The board has the right to either concur or not concur with the recommendation. So that gets to similar to when the manager hires a public works employee, the person who is making the recommendation, there's the question of do you defer to the person who has the authority to conduct those interviews or not? And that's a board, almost a policy governance issue more than it is a legal question. Are you going to rely on the people who have participated in the process and who have the authority to make the appointment and rely upon their judgment in that, or are you going to take it a step further and second guess that? That's, again, that's a policy governance issue more than it is a legal issue. There's no law that says that you have to look at the book or you can't look at the book. That's kind of an internal policy question, and I was not involved in any of those issues. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
Sort of. Let me back up.
Well, historically, we haven't not been in this situation very often. Recently, you had a transition in the fire chief's position where the former township supervisor brought forward his candidate. It wasn't open for debate with the board. Prior to that, two supervisors before that was an issue with planning commission. Supervisor appoints planning commission members. The board was not part of that discussion or determination other than having it brought forward. What Roger was using as an example is I'm delegated by the board to hire all the other staff. When I hire a superintendent of public works, or when I hire a planner, or when I hire a clerical person, the board doesn't see those. I bring the recommendation, I make the hire. Township government is a strange animal. The Charter Township Act is a strange document. It is totally different than any other hiring process, and that for whatever reason, and I don't know what it is, the Charter Township Act delegates to the township supervisor authority to make two hires, basically, in essence, with board concurrence. That's the fire chief and planning commission members. There's generally discussion about planning commission members because they're usually local. It's not necessarily the case in fire chief. We haven't had much turnover in fire chiefs. I think there've only been, over the last 20 years, 3 fire chiefs, I believe. 3 chiefs, and one of those had been the chief twice before. So, so it's really only 2. So it's an unusual circumstance and an unusual situation, the way the wording is, and it comes from the structure of township government with the 3 officers and 4 trustees. There are very specific statutory requirements for each of the elected officials, whether it's the supervisor, the clerk, the treasurer, or trustee. And there are only 3 that are involved in any hiring process. That's the supervisor, the clerk, and the treasurer, because they're authorized. Clerk and treasurer are authorized to hire deputies. The supervisor is authorized to hire fire chief and planning commission members. Beyond that, the authority to hire all other township staff have been delegated to me as the township manager. So, that's just kind of a framework of the way it is in township government. It's the same thing as our neighbor next door, the city of Marquette, can levy without a vote 25 mills. We're capped at 5 without a vote. So so I say charter townships and general law townships are statutorily structured differently than other entities, and it's confusing, troublesome, actually.
And the reason?
I've struggled with this for the last few months because this is not a power thing that I'm trying to pull here. This is following the guidelines that I'm given. And talking to Aaron Graves and talking to Roger and talking to the previous fire chief and talking to the HR manager, how do I do this without including my board? You guys are part of what all our decisions are. This is not me just pulling throwing my weight around. It's me being restricted and yet told to do something. This is the way it has to operate. And I sat right in that chair and argued with my supervisor and said, I'm not going to vote on this because you're throwing it down my throat. And he had very little to say because it's the nature of this job.
So you understand where we're coming from.
Exactly,
too.
that's why I've struggled with this.
I have nothing wrong with, or nothing against the candidates that are, I just wanted to have the option to just look at them and view it.
Well,
I'm sorry I didn't get the email and didn't see that, but
it's not something that's normally done. Randy and I thought it would be a good idea, just in case,
I think it was a good idea.
knowing you guys.
I think it was a good idea.
But it's still not required. You're supposed to take my word for it. I mean, it's a,
That don't work.
I agree. I'm a property, I'm a business owner. If somebody told me this is so contrary to what I've always done. It's not up to me. This is the way it has to be.
It may be a moot point as far as I'm concerned. I gotta ask Roger too, being a member of the fire department, should I be allowed to vote or should I step back on the vote?
That's up to the board.
That's up to the board?
Well, if you feel that you have a
Conflict.
conflict, I don't believe it falls squarely under the, as a conflict of interest when you are not a paid employee of the fire department, except for being on call. It would be different if you were a paid employee of the township, I believe, which in itself would create a different type of conflict.
Wouldn't be on the board if he was in there.
That's right, that's what I'm
Okay, I
saying.
just
That would
wanted-
be a different type of
I wanted
conflict.
clarification. I wanted clarification on that.
But it would then be up to the board, if you feel that you do have a conflict, to vote on that and to whether to allow you to not vote, essentially.
Comes a board
Does that
decision.
have to be unanimous too?
Yes.
I think so, to absolve somebody from, yeah. John, I think you had your hand up a while back.
I've got, this is not a challenge to the procedure that's been taken. What I want to ask is, early on in the planning of how the procedure was going to be carried out, there was a end action that indicated that outside aides would be asked, other people away from the township. Has that been scuttled, or is it still in play?
What do you mean outside aides?
Well, the outside fire, let this manager tell you what it is.
Yeah,
I
we had-
wasn't sure who you were asking.
We had originally talked about establishing a committee of five, including two outside individuals, and that part did not occur. We ended up changing our position by having the supervisor, myself, and the current fire
Okay,
chief.
so that's scuttled,
Right.
and that's, okay. Now, and I think a lot of the questions that have been asked tonight could be simply stated. We could get a reply from our attorney. Is the statement that's in state statute that the supervisor has the sole authority to appoint the fire chief, subject to the approval of the township board? My assumption is that means 4 votes approving. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, well then, we can end a lot of conversation
Yeah,
about that.
but you don't want informed votes? You want to be informed what you're voting on?
No, wait a minute. I'm
Explain.
just asking for clarification of what does that mean, subject to the approval of the township board? That means that the supervisor, under statute, is going to appoint the fire chief, and what the supervisor is required to obtain is at least 4 votes of the township board. That, once you understand that, and you come to grips with that, you can question anything you want. You can ask for anything you want. But the bottom line is, state statute does that. And it isn't just this supervisor, it's any supervisor that's gonna sit in a charter township. And I can tell you that, in my opinion, one of the reasons why the charter township language is more brutal or more direct than language that guides a non-charter township is because they wanted to make, if you're going to become a charter township, we want the authority to rest with the leadership. It's the supervisor, the treasurer, and the clerk. And that's why they did it. You can fault them for it if you want, but that's what it's all about. That's the end of my presentation.
And it is different than all other levels of government.
Well, I actually think it's kind of interesting because I remember the supervisor sitting on the far end down there where Trustee Everson is sitting and watching her go back and forth with the supervisor, then Limita.
Must be something in this chair.
And arguing this whole point. And from my perspective, I don't dispute the supervisor's authority to make the appointment, and the board, its responsibility to concur or not concur. It's just that simple. I mean, that's my opinion. If you wanted to change the way that was going to work, you should have changed it before the whole process started. And it would have been that simple. When we started down this road, the manager explained how the process was going to be done and the matrix that was going to be used. And the comments were to keep this all above board and transparent. And I haven't heard who the nominee is going to be yet. I have read through the paperwork that was made available to us, and I'm sorry, Dan, but I did get that memo.
I believe it was sent out.
I came into the office and I sat down and read it all. And it's my curiosity is when you come up with the appointment is how and where they fall in the matrix of what we set up, and are we really picking the one that rated the highest, or are we?
I have rationale.
I believe you do, but my concurrence or non-concurrence as a member of the board is based on the matrix, how that was put together, above board and transparent and all that stuff, and as long as we're someplace in the neighborhood, great. If we're not, then I will have a problem with it.
That's what I followed, as limited as it was. Was first, Randy?
Well, speaking to Trustee Everson's conflict, many years ago, when we had the old water contract issue, well, I'm a city employee working for the waterworks. So that was kind of a touchy subject with myself. And so it really wasn't really conflicts of issues are really financial. But if you look at the ethical part of it, you can always ask the board, like I did at the time, that I didn't feel comfortable voting on it, and they excused me. So if you feel you have a conflict ethically, then you could be asked to be excused by the board for this issue.
Would that be before or after I name the candidate?
That would be probably before, because when you're excused from the issue, you have no comment. You basically have to sit in the audience or even leave the room. Probably to sit in the audience, I would think. And you really have to leave the board table when that happens, because you have no comment.
The conflict in this case wouldn't matter who the candidate was.
Yeah.
We're talking about the chief, and if the conflict is being a member of the department, it wouldn't matter who the candidate was, it would still be a conflict. So, it's but I think Roger's correct. I think if you're not a regularly staffed member, it would not be a conflict.
Unless the board excuses him.
And let me clarify on that, that an individual board member must avoid the appearance of impropriety and if it's a personal issue of feeling that you could not be unbiased in the manner in which the vote was, in the manner in which you voted, then that can be a grounds for excusal also. And then if the board would concur, you do need to step aside from the table and should not be part of the deliberation process. But it is not necessary to actually leave the room. You could take a seat in the audience if that's the route that transpires.
Historically, I'm only aware of one time in the almost 17 years that I've been here, and it was the first year that I was here as a manager, that there was an actual conflict where a sitting board member was taking an action that would affect an employee who was also their spouse, declared a conflict, and the board said, nope, you're going to vote.
Well, I'll clarify that. But it was one individual that said, you're going to vote. That
Yeah.
was one
It has to be a unanimous vote, but it was in that particular case with that particular board with its dynamics, that individual board member was forced to vote, which was fine. But I just thought it was kind of interesting because that's the issue of abstaining and the reason the board has to be unanimous in allowing someone to abstain, because you have a duty as a Charter Township board member to vote on all issues that come forward unless you feel that there's a conflict and the board agrees.
Go ahead, Pete.
And just a question for the manager, for the attorney. What importance does deadline have in putting this in? Where does that go as far as it?
It is my
We
understanding.
follow it, we don't follow it?
Well, you chose to extend the deadline to make the process more fair, because the original publication had a deadline which was unrealistic by the time the publication printed it.
Only in certain areas.
Right, but if anybody wished to apply before that deadline, they were not prejudiced in any way, shape, or form because they got their application in. So it's fairly common practice, actually, to extend deadlines because of a plethora of reasons. In this case, the reason for extending or removing the deadline was to make the process more fair and more transparent, to allow more people to apply so that the public and this board could not complain that, well, had this been published in a different manner and had this artificial deadline not been adhered to, we may have gotten a lot more qualified people. So by extending the deadline, you have essentially opened up the pool of candidates beyond what you would have had if you had rigid adherence to an artificial deadline that you had actual knowledge really was having the effect of barring potential candidates from applying. So if anyone were to apply subsequent to that, the initial candidates have nothing to complain about because they got their applications in, and by the same token, the people who applied subsequently have nothing to complain about because they got their applications in. So it is really an exercise in trying to give the board the most options to get the best qualified candidate, whether that's a local candidate or a distant candidate. It just opens up the pool to have a better evaluation process at hand.
So my question is that we ran it again in an area, but in this area, we did not. The deadline was March 23rd for this area. We didn't extend that deadline.
Extended for everybody.
We didn't run it again. We only ran
ran
it
it
3 times. Right, but in the mind year, we only ran it once. We had the deadline of the 23rd. That just stand by itself. Now, because they made a mistake before,
That
then you
ran-
did it
But
again.
that
nationally.
ran at the date that it was supposed to run. It ran for the full month and a half in the mining journal. That ran. It did not run in the nationals. So-
It ran 3 times in mind drill.
Mhm. Yeah, with that deadline, but
Yeah.
but you had the full from the first insertion to the March 23rd, that entire time frame. There was not one local candidate other than our 2 internals.
But the way I'm looking at it, that we should have closed that 23rd for this area, and you extended it in the other areas beyond that, with no deadline.
No, we extended
everywhere.
it
It was in the national
everywhere.
public, the 2
Yeah.
national fire publications, so all of the firefighters that would have been eligible to apply would have seen it, local as well as outside.
Yeah, to try to extend it in one area and not in another would be impractical, because how do you know where somebody read the publication? So the rationale would be, and I have no idea on whether this even would apply, but if someone applied after the original deadline, the deadline was extended for everyone, essentially. So I'm not really seeing an issue in that effect.
Yeah.
It's again just broadening the pool.
The 2 publications that failed to advertise timely were the Michigan Association of Fire Chiefs and the International Association of Fire Chiefs.
So, I mean, any qualified candidate may have reviewed and read the updated or the second publication that did not have the original deadline. So it would be slightly irrational to say that you should be excluding some candidates from one area of the country or some state where this thing wasn't read. I mean, we don't know where they read the publication. I think you could run into some problems if you tried to exclude candidates. As long as an applicant submitted an application that was compliant with the criteria that the township specified in any of those publications, then I think that the application should be reviewed. And it may be that the application, it doesn't even warrant an interview or a discussion because of other qualification issues, but I don't think that the artificial deadline should exclude any candidate. Answers the question.
You have to interview all applicants?
Pardon me?
Randy, I guess, you have to interview all the applicants?
No. There were in fact several applicants that did not meet the minimums that we did not include in the process. The whole purpose of going through the matrix process is to determine who meets the minimum requirements predicated upon what the job requirements are, and those that don't meet that don't go forward in the process.
Do the ones that we're discussing, will be discussing or voting on, do they all meet the qualifications?
All the ones that were in the binder, yeah.
Okay.
Dan?
I owe you an apology. I did go back in my emails, and it's there. It's my fault for not seeing it. And I guess at this point, we have to trust yours and Randy's judgment and Ron's judgment and who you want to put in. So I'm sorry that I said what I said, but I didn't see it.
It's important to know if anybody's having difficulties with communication. We talked about that today, with getting new computers. We need to make sure you guys get information. I'm glad you got it.
I get so much junk mail in there, I just missed it, so.
I'll flag them in the future so that, if you see something, it's gonna be from me.
Okay.
But again, understand, the process that we followed, that Ron and I had input to the supervisor with regard to our feelings and opinions on the variety of candidates. So I think there were a total of 11 that we were ultimately looking at, and we narrowed that down to 6, I believe it was, if I remember correctly. and passed that along knowing that it was the supervisor's decision predicated upon the information that was available and in her opinion, and who the best candidate in her opinion would be for the position.
It's just hard I've been in the fire service for 40 years and not having a say into anything of it. It's hard to swallow that and move along, but
And again, it is.
trust your judgment.
Yeah, again, it is the structure, and it's the statutory structure. I know in other entities like cities, it's a much different structure in selecting department heads and chiefs. They're not hampered by the kind of statutory framework that we are, and it is hampering. I mean, I'm sure it would have been much easier for the supervisor to have it be a whole board process, but statutorily it just isn't. It's just not the case. And I think Trustee Marks is correct. It was designed that way for whatever reason back in the 1800s when township governments were established.
Were you there?
I was. It was ugly. It was
That's when
nasty.
you got to start.
It was very difficult. How many times did I come into your office, Randy, and pulling my hair out? How do I do this?
Well, and we did, and the purpose of us doing Skype contacts with some of these candidates was to verify information because they were out of state, to verify whether or not their criteria and their credentials were valid in the state of Michigan, a variety of things, whether they're on national registries. So it was not in essence, an interview type of a process. It was more of a validation with the three of us, basically validating what it was that we got, ensuring that the information was correct, and doing the background checks. And that's why we did it by Skype, to not incur any expense. We did it over Skypes.
I believe completely that this is the best candidate. I have absolutely no doubt.
Well, who is it?
It's not you,
I
I'm
don't
sorry,
know.
Dan. Any more questions?
I think it'd be
Comments?
proper for you just to, I think since it's your appointment, you would make the motion to approve who you'd
Yeah,
like.
that's what I intended. And like I said, I do have a rationale. Okay. I would like to recommend the current and past Assistant Chief Shanahan as my recommendation for Chief of Marquette Township Fire Department. My rationale is that he's an internal candidate, which gives us an opportunity to promote from within. He's consistently dealt with personnel issues very professionally. He has 19 years with the township, and I believe about 8 as assistant chief. He knows the department's history, the community, the employees. He's comfortable with and knows the township board. Promoting from within encourages staff to know they can advance in the department, and I think that's very important. Encouraging for the on-call employees who know they can advance in the department, which is also very important. Dan can start sooner than any of the other candidates. There's no overall orientation necessary, so the learning curve is shorter. And like any other candidate, from Oregon to Florida that we looked at, there's a 120-day probationary period. So regardless of who it is, he could be gone in 30 days. I don't know what that process is. I hope it's not mine. So I make the motion to appoint Dan Shanahan to fire chief.
Does that have an effective date on it?
Immediate.
Immediately, but he would give 2 weeks' notice to his current employer.
I'll support that.
Any more discussion? Dave?
One question is there was a gentleman, and I'm not sure where he's from, but when I was looking at the matrix, and I put a lot more stock in the matrix than I suppose I probably should have, but it's a numbers thing, and who rated considerably higher, and I wonder what your logic was in not making that choice.
I don't know that I want to discuss personnel. issues at the board, I can tell you later if you want. I don't know that that's
You mean
appropriate.
after a
If
vote?
somebody wants to override me, yeah, after the vote. I don't want to get into this person did this or didn't do that, or, you know, I like this one, I didn't like that one. I don't think that's appropriate unless somebody feels that I have to.
Well, I guess all eyes are looking at me.
I didn't look at you.
In fairness, it is an open meeting, and you can't have any deliberation or discussion after words about that. So I guess it may be somewhat beneficial to just indicate, again, I guess I felt that the points that you were making here address some of those things just from a legal criteria standpoint, but in terms of the positives that may outweigh some of the other factors that
That's
were
what I was just
considered.
gonna say.
And I was not involved, obviously, in those Skype sessions or the interview procedure whatsoever. But maybe it would be appropriate to just elaborate from an open meeting standpoint of what the thought process was in reaching the final and the balancing of the factors.
That's the only question I was asking, it's just,
Yeah, no, I understand. I wouldn't want to say anything, I'm not gonna say anything bad about any of the candidates, because there were a bunch of, it was tough. It was a good pool of candidates. But that's what struck me most, was these, I think, I would probably rate the paper part of the applications half. Maybe that percentage isn't enough, but based on all of the required certifications or qualifications that were necessary, this stuff won out with me because it has to be about the township. It has to be about our future and what we're going to try to accomplish in the next 5 years. And these things will make it better and easier for us to do that because of, you know, you weren't privy to the interviews, the Skype and the conversations. Nobody did anything or said anything bad. It's just that when you couple the positives with especially these, I think that's just, this is just, I don't know. Does that kind of answer your question, or?
Well, from the standpoint of township manager, we had the luxury of having a large pool of very well-qualified candidates, which was very encouraging to me. It indicates that we have a pretty good reputation. Some were highly qualified in education, some were highly qualified in years of service, some were highly qualified in types of service that they had, some were varying combinations of all of those. You know, and I guess the bottom line comes down to the supervisor's judgment in terms of her opinion of taking all things into consideration. What were the most valuable items to her going forward? I know Ron and I both gave recommendations. You know, from our standpoints, Ron's as the fire chief, mine is the township manager, and I'm sure those were all stirred into the mix of making the decision. But I guess that's all I can offer. We had great candidates. I mean, we did.
I went through all the applications. I spent one afternoon looking at every one of them, going back through them a number of times and that, and reading what was written on it, and matrix and everything else in that. And in my professional life, I did a lot of hiring of highly technical people. And when you talk about applications coming through and you had to go down and nitpick some things in that, it became very difficult at times in that too. But looking at what was presented there, after reading them all, thinking about them, I came to the conclusion none of them would be negative to the township overall. I don't think any of them would be negative in that to the township. They all would bring something to benefit the township overall. It's just a matter of selecting that one individual who you thought would be the best going into the future. And sometimes that's very difficult to do, but you have to really put yourself on a pedestal, and you got to do it. You don't have a choice about it, and you have to move forward in that too, so. That's all I have to say.
John?
Is the motion to approve the supervisor's appointment? Is that what the motion is?
It is correct, and it has
Thank you.
been seconded.
I just want one question. The problem with someone internal is that what we've been through for the last how many years and the expense that we have, this person has to be strong. You can't have carry any baggage with you because of what happened before, and it's not easy to be standing out there alone sometimes. And relationships and all friendships and all that stuff has to go, you have to come to the township first, and that's what we did not have in the past. And we paid dearly for it, so.
Roll call vote.
Anything else? Okay.
Supervisor Durant.
Yes.
Clerk Rattari is yes. Trustee LaRue.
No?
Trustee Wiegand.
Yes.
Trustee Marks.
Yes?
Trustee Everson.
Yes?
Treasurer Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1.
Thank you.
At the
Congratulations.
For housekeeping, we will swear in the new chief because its appointment is immediate. So if you would like to join us at the podium, we will swear you in.
Oh, Rob's got a phone.
Prepared.
No, that's all right. I don't talk to anybody about this. That's the
So I'm
problem.
just, okay.
I had to keep it hush hush. You want to read?
Yeah, I'll actually.
Probably do a formal introduction at the next meeting.
I'm actually the clerk, so,
I'm just gonna repeat it.
no, actually, I will read it,
Oh,
so
then okay.
I'll just do like I do for the election inspector, so. Hey, raise your right hand. Marquette Charter Township Fire Chief, oath of office, State of Michigan, County of Marquette. I, Daniel Shanahan, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States, Constitution of this state, and I'll faithfully perform the duties of Fire Chief for the Charter Township of Marquette, County of Marquette, and State of Michigan according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
I do.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
Mr. Chief.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll have you sign these for a minute. Yeah, both of them. Okay, you will take one and I will keep one.
So, sorry. At some point, once you've had a
Thank you.
chance
Okay.
to think about all this, you'll have, I want to make sure of protocols, you'll have the opportunity sometime in the next whatever months or weeks to appoint his assistant. So.
Raise the microphone a little bit so I can hear you guys. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so at some point, you'll have to decide on who you want, how you want your,
That's something I have thought about since I applied. I did think about that. I don't know if, well, I haven't discussed it with that person
yeah,
even.
you might want to think about it.
Okay.
Yeah, just to make sure.
in case
This is
they
a
don't
lot
want
to absorb,
It is, it
Yeah.
really is.
but
But,
I think then, does that come back to the board too? He can do it on his own? Not that I care, I'm just trying
Yeah, I
to
think it's
finish the
14
process here.
I didn't look that far ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe,
know it's his appointment.
I believe it
think
is with board
everything
concurrence.
From the
This time
fire
I thought they
department
All the
just-
has to have
officers
board.
come back
Yeah.
All,
Yeah.
for approval.
all staff
So
have to be
think
with board
about it, talk
concurrence.
to your staff.
Okay,
and-
I will do that.
Even new hires.
Thank you.
You want to say
Or is
something?
it like the
I'm trying to
deputy
No,
say-
treasurer?
no, I'm not. I just,
Like-
thank you, and
Yeah,
I
it
will
may-
give it my hardest. I understand some concerns, I do, obviously, but I will give it my best effort, and I won't let you down. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I know that was
I'm
hard.
not so sure, but I'm not sure, so I'll check that tomorrow.
Okay, we had no items pulled from the consent agenda. How about committee updates? Dave,
Oh, yeah.
anything to share?
Sure. From the Planning Commission meeting from June 11th, there's a special use permit hearing request, a public hearing request concerning short-term rentals for the township ordinance. The applicant was the Ray Family LLC on 250 Partridge Bay Trail, and the public hearing was set for August the 15th. In the works and going to be brought to the Planning Commission's agenda on the 25th of July, as there's a second application for a special use permit, and we're going to try and fit that same public hearing in on the same date, the time permitting. The citizen survey, review and discussion of the results from that citizen survey was moved to the July 25th meeting. Due to time constraints for the July 11th, there just wasn't enough time to get the information together. For the capital improvements project requests, as you may recall from the June 3rd Planning Commission report, 14 capital improvement requests had been received from Public Works and 1 from Planning and Zoning. With respect to the Public Works CIP requests, and as much as the superintendent of Public Works was not present to answer questions at the June 27th meeting, his presence was requested at the then upcoming June 11th Planning Commission meeting, and he was provided a written copy of Planning Commission questions and concerns with respect to the lack of justification, forecast life expectancies, funding information, and more detailed explanation of CIP requests whose completion are contingent upon approval of other submitted CIPs. His written response was requested for inclusion into the July 11th Planning Commission packets. At the July 11th Planning Commission meeting, the supervisor advised the Planning Commission that Public Works CIP requests, while required to be considered by the Planning Commission per state statute, should be viewed as a pass-through request to the board, and the commission should not request too much detail referencing the numerous questions presented to the superintendent of Public Works in the June 27th meeting. With that in mind, and in large part due to the supervisor's comments, the Planning Commission moved to send the Public Works CIP request to the board without recommendation for approval in consideration of the as of yet unanswered questions. The Planning and Zoning request, a CIP request, was received from the Planning and Zoning Department requesting installation of video equipment in the community room. The CIP request was moved to the board with recommendation for approval, together with an additional recommendation that rental fees for the community room be reviewed and adjusted to recoup the video equipment investment from the actual users. From the Recreation Committee, items considered from the meeting that just followed this board meeting. There was an update for Lions Field, and I talked to Overstar's project manager for Lions Field today. And due to the fact that there was some back-ordered apparatus, well, I don't remember if it was picnic tables or benches, they were all delivered, however, yesterday, and the installation will be completed by the end of next week. So a week from Friday, that installation should be complete. The water fountain was inspected today, and that installation will be taking place by the weekend. Bottom line for that whole thing is that everything will be done before the community days. We were working on a event safety information record, and we should have a draft of that for the attorney's consideration. If you recall, when we discussed it the last time, it was suggested that before the attorney weighed in, we should have a hard copy of whatever we had in mind, so he had something to actually review. That draft should be complete by the next meeting, and he should be able to forward it to you. My question to the board is do you want that to come to the board before it goes to the attorney for consideration and review, or do you want it to go to the attorney so he can weigh in on it before the board actually sees it? And the other question with the rec committee was the thank you letters. We're getting ready to send some thank you letters out. We had talked a couple meetings ago about the thank you letters being generated by the manager with the supervisor's signature, the manager's signature, and the committee chairman's signature on it to make it just a little more official and a little more noteworthy for the recipients. So before these thank you letters go out, we'd like to know if the board wants to move ahead on that, or if you just want the rec committee to send them out on their own. It seems that if the rec committee sends them on their own, we're kind of sidestepping the whole process that should be in place. With the road committee, as you're aware, the July 3rd meeting was canceled, so there's no report different from the last. And that's it for me.
Just to dovetail on the road committee, I did finalize the maintenance contract and submitted that back to Mark Davatala for signature. Did that on Monday when I got back in town.
We haven't heard anything on when their start date or anything is, right?
Not as yet. Like I said, I signed it on behalf of the township and forwarded it back to Mark, and we'll get the final one back.
Does that need to be done every year, or is it just?
That's our annual maintenance. That's the
But I mean, it has to be signed every year?
There'll be some aspect of maintenance done almost every year, yes. This is the first go-round after we completed the road project.
So going forward, you'll review it and sign it every year?
Yeah, the process is we go through the PASER review each year and identify those segments of road that need to be addressed and what the addressing needs to be, and then we go out on bids to get quotations. So
I should tag on what the manager's saying. This is the first year that we have done the larger maintenance. We did some maintenance last year on some of the roads, but this year's was done without the benefit of the asset management program. We're looking forward to the road committee recommendations next year having a benefit of the asset management program for selection of the roads. So hopefully next year it'll go a little smoother. The objective is to review the asset management recommendations and go out and review those roads before winter gets here so that we can discuss them, get bids, and be ready to go in January with an award so that we can get a jump on the contractors and better pricing.
Once we get those bids, if the asphalt prices change, do those fluctuate, or is that part of the contract, or?
That would be to the contract guy to decide that, I guess.
right,
I
try
just
to lock
wondered.
it in the contract.
Whether they go up or down, it doesn't matter
Doesn't
then?
matter, that's our cost then.
Okay.
That's the bid.
Pete, did you?
Yeah, I brought it up at the Recreation Committee meeting. When we send these cards out, I thought that the manager should sign because he is a contact for the township, along with the supervisor and the department head. I think that'd be important.
What's the board pleasure? Does it make a difference or preference? We definitely need to recognize.
I just,
I'm all about
then the
it.
suggestion was
We
just
have
to
them all come
clean
in
up
here.
the process. I don't think we need to have a whole group come in here, but just clean up the process so that they're getting a letterhead recognition of their, and just to thank them for what they're doing. And I think it should go out to the individuals that are doing those kind of things, as well as the corporations that are doing it. They should all get the same letter.
Well, in the past, though, Randy, you've always put up some kind of a resolution or when we thank people or thank them for service or years of service.
Yeah, we've done those in special cases, but I think Dave's just talking about general thank yous.
Yeah, just, I mean, when you have somebody that goes a little above and beyond, and some of these funding dollars that have come in for the underpass, there's a lot of money. People are spending a lot of their time and money doing that, and the recreation over to Lions Field, and we've got Lowe's is in the process of putting the plantings over to Schwemmwood. I mean, there's a lot of people that are stepping up to make that kind of stuff happen. They just need to be recognized, in the rec committee's opinion.
So, what do you want?
Just get them generated, get them
do
to
'em
the
and-
manager. and
Want some direction from the board? Do you
Yeah, I
want us
didn't
to
know if
actually do
everybody
that?
wants
or-
a motion or what?
Yes.
No, it's not a
Okay.
motion. It's just,
Okay.
do you want us to do that?
Yes.
Sure, that would be great.
We can concur with what you say.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Is that this week or just whenever you don't have them
We're
yet?
just going to surprise you.
Okay, yeah, good. That's what I need, is more surprises. All right.
And I guess just to clarify that one step further, do you want the manager to put this letter together so that it follows the same format, or do you want the committees to put the letter together and send it to the manager? I would think it would be more appropriate if the manager put it together so it followed a general format and a general idea.
Good
because
idea.
Not a problem.
Same
Sometimes the
letter.
committees kind of wander off in directions.
They do.
No. Okay. Sure. Sounds like it's good.
And I guess the process, from my understanding then, is the committee will submit a recommendation to the manager, and he can take care of the rest of it. Okay.
He and I will sign it, and who else did you say?
And the chairman of whatever committee it is.
Okay. Okay. All right. I just want to clarify one thing you said. I did not say it should be a pass-through on the CIP from the Planning Commission. I believe I said it 3 times, that I was not recommending a pass-through.
That's not what I heard.
Okay, well, I'll go back and listen to the tape. I hope that's what I said. That's my intent. Anything else for updates? Okay. No committee appointments? Public comment? Anybody want to share? Okay. Wrap up. Announcements from anybody? John?
Well, our township has a representative to the PB League, and an appropriate uniform has been presented tonight to our representative. And I would ask that at this time, that uniform be displayed for,
I concur. Try it on, Pete.
Well, maybe a couple years ago. The pickleball. Thank you, John. And just for your information, the person representing the pickleball just won the trophy up in Norway. And we will be at the community days, and I'll try to get this on, for a pickleball clinic on the north end of the ice rink, so.
please represent us in uniform.
Well, I'll give you a spread, I'll tell you that. Thank you very much.
Okay, a few things from the clerk's office, a few dates here. Next Tuesday at 4 o'clock, we're gonna have a public accuracy test here. That's where we test our voting machines to make sure they're right. And that's open to the public, so anyone that would like to come can come. It's 4 o'clock, it'll be in the community room. Saturday, August 4th, will be clerk's hours here at the Township Hall. It'll be noon to 2. I will be here to give out or take in any absentee ballots. After 2 o'clock on Saturday, any absentee ballots that are given out can't leave the building. So that's your opportunity, one last opportunity to come in and get one, or get one, or I can take it in. I'll be here till 2 o'clock that Saturday. Same day, Community Day, so I'll hopefully get over there after that. Tuesday, August 7th is the election here. Let me get my calendar here. Tuesday, August 7th is the election. It's primary. Remember, a reminder to the voters, on primaries, you can't cross party lines. And on this year's ballot, it's a little bit easier. They got arrows down the line, so you just stay within those arrows and things are good. So And there is 2 county proposals on the primary ballot also, so hopefully that will keep the spoiled ballots down, because sometimes people like to cross over, and we have to tell them, no, we can't do that, so. And election day, 7 a.m., the polls will open, and they will close at 8 p.m., so make sure you get here by 8. And that's it from the elections department. Our next meeting, as Supervisor Durant said, will be August 8th, Wednesday, at 6:30 due to the election on Tuesday, so.
Any other announcements? Okay, managers report.
You do have a written report that I placed at your places earlier today. Apologize for being out of town last week, so I kind of lost track of what was happening, so this got to you a little bit late. Well, I'll walk through it. What Trustee LaRue was referring to is he will be demonstrating, participating in demonstrating a pickleball tournament at the Community Day on Saturday, August the 4th. And it's unfortunate that Clerk Rotari has office hours that day because there won't be anybody coming in. They'll all be at Community Day, we hope. But in any event, that'll be happening Saturday, August the 4th from 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock in the evening. As in previous years, I think this is the 8th or 9th annual Community Day that we've had. The Community Events Committee had a meeting today. We're finalizing the poster on that, recorded a couple of advertisements, and the posters will be distributed here pretty quickly. We'll be meeting again in 2 weeks, just before the Community Day. This is a family-friendly event, as it has been in prior years. It's going to include a softball tournament, as in prior years. We'll possibly start Friday evening and carry over into Sunday, but certainly all day Saturday will be a softball tournament going on at the field. A variety of musical entertainment, including jazz, some local singers, rock music, and contemporary music all day long, be continuous. We will have the Neighbors Noon Out will be going on as it has in the past. We'll have stationary presence with fire department, some of the equipment, the sheriff's department, hopefully state police, and the county sheriff's rescue unit possibly, or their water rescue. We'll have, for the kids, we'll have 3 of the large inflatables that'll be set up on the ice rink along with the pickleball folks. So the improvements that were made this year to Lions Field will be adding picnic tables and grills along with additional seating areas. There'll be face painting for the kids. The state police will be back there again this year with their child ID program, which includes a photograph, a data disk with information regarding the children, fingerprints, for ID identification should there be lost or abducted. I believe they will also have the driving simulator will be there, and as always there'll be food. This year Super One will be operating the grill. This year we'll have the wood-fired pizza, we'll have the ice cream truck. It's going to be a great time. As in prior years, I do ask that the board authorize waiving of the no alcohol policy for that day and that event only, which we have done in previous years. So that is a request of the board to waive that regulation just for that day.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because if they be playing ball.
Friday evening, or all day Saturday in particular, and possibly carry over into Sunday morning.
So moved.
We are going to have to do that now.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a request of the board. As David mentioned, the construction that's going on will be completed prior to the Community Day on the 4th of August. Jumping back into the report, just letting you know that the DDA boundary extension ordinance, the camping ordinance, and the ORV ordinance all have been published and all have received affidavits of publishing, so we're covered on all those. Our office hours are continuing through Labor Day as they currently are. We have an issue with the access to Meyer. And the issue is that people don't recognize or realize that the intersection of North Brickyard Road and the Meyer Access Drive, the West Access Drive, is a signalized intersection. There is a stop sign at that intersection, so traffic coming out of Meyer towards US 41 must stop at the Brickyard, North Brickyard intersection. If you do not, you will be cited, and if you cause an accident, you will be the at-fault party. That stop, I've routinely seen people just blow right through that stop sign. It's there, it is a legitimate stop sign, and you do have to stop. The intent is to give a break in the traffic so the residents on Brickyard, North Brickyard Road can access and egress their own road. So that is a serious issue. Also, the 2019 budget, we're in the process right now of closing out June. I suspect within the next week to week and a half, we'll be distributing the preliminary budget sheets to the department heads. So we'll be starting into the budget process. And I will be, if Clerk Rattari can provide me that a copy of the last work session last week, we'll blend that into some of that information. So when you get your preliminary budgets, those will be incorporated and included. And we'll be reporting that, excuse me, back to you at your first meeting in August. Other than that, I didn't have anything else at this time.
Any questions for the manager? Dan?
I just have two. You had mentioned the community days, no dogs being allowed. Maybe we should reiterate that a little bit.
We had a fair amount of conflict last year with people bringing dogs to the community day. Dogs are not allowed at the Lions Field Recreation Area, so do not bring your dog to the community days. The only exception are if you have a licensed service dog, and you will have to provide the license if you bring one. Simply having the jacket on it saying it's a service dog will not suffice, and if you do bring your dogs, you will have to remove them. Simple as that.
And the second thing, when we talked about the camping ordinance, have any signs been made up and/or posted?
I believe they are up. Signs were ordered, and I think they were supposed to have been put up last week. I have not been around since I got back in town Sunday.
You're not allowed to go on
see.
vacation.
I kind of liked it. It's the first one in 17 years, so it was pretty nice, actually. So yes, those signs were ordered right after the ordinance was passed. And I believe they are installed. They were supposed to be put up this last week.
Thank you.
Anything else for the manager? Pete?
The dogs, last year some dogs got a little aggressive and fighting with each other, and so that's some of the reasons, and their droppings and stuff like that, so.
Well, and the other thing is there were a number of residents that are just simply terrified of dogs, and we had a large number of complaints.
Dave, I think you're next.
I have a question about the portable facilities that are at the Lions Field. I thought for a longest time that was put there by the contractor, but I'm just wondering if that's true. And
No, we do. We close the facility at 10 o'clock, our restroom facility at 10 during the summer months, but it's light until almost 11, so we still have people there. So we have placed an outhouse facility at Lions Field. We historically have done that, and I did do it again this year. We will have, for Community Day, we'll have 3 additional ones placed for that day. So we'll have plenty of facility for people.
I would point out that on the back of the facility, there is some containers to pick up the dog droppings. I'm just wondering
Yes.
why those are there if we don't allow dogs.
Because they use them in other places, not just with us.
Well, we did have a fair amount of discussion about that because we do have people walking dogs all over Trowbridge Park, and we thought it was a good idea to provide that use as the city has along their bike paths. And since we were installing pathways through the park, I suspect people will be using those pathways. So that was the rationale.
Andy?
So I'll move on the manager's request to waive the alcohol policy for, was it Friday evening?
Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday morning until noon.
Okay, Friday at what time you think about?
I think they're going to start early afternoon, like 1 o'clock.
Okay, so Friday at noon through Sunday at noon.
Correct.
So that'll be a motion to make that. Okay, and that's,
Or Pete, did you want to comment first?
No, I want to ask Randy a question. I'll wait till after the vote.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, now Pete?
I wish we could evaluate that thing, that porta potty,
Oh, we can, certainly.
because, after 10 o'clock, there are not too many kids going there, and that bathroom's open till 10 o'clock. It's only 100 feet difference, so, to save some money, I would like to see us, try it without it and see what people say next year.
Sure. Not a problem.
Anything else for the manager? Okay. That was a motion. So Randy, you can review.
Okay, first motion was consent agenda as presented. That was approved. It's no one's responsibility. Second motion was approval of the agenda as presented, and that's no one's responsibility. See, a lot of these things aren't anyone's responsibility, so. Motion 3 was the approval of the fire department apparatus ballot proposal, and that was approved. That's the clerk's responsibility. It'll be done tomorrow. Fourth motion was consider the sheriff's funding ballot proposal. That was approved, and that's the clerk's job tomorrow. And policy 3.7, the action item was made for the clerk to track the motion, so I will start doing that. That's not a motion, but an action item. Action item was to defer the work session for township operations. It's an action item to get the recording to the manager, and he will move that to the August 8th meeting. So I will do that tomorrow. Fifth motion was to approve Dan Shanahan as the fire chief, and that was approved. That's no action item. It was done tonight. The chief was sworn in, so that. Sixth motion was to waive the alcohol policy from August 3rd, Friday at noon, to Sunday, August 5th at noon, and that was approved. And that'll be, I think that's the manager's baby to let everyone know that that was waived. That's not the clerk's job. And that's it.
Okay. Any board member comment? Pete?
Last week, I attended Dulcie's assessing meeting from 8 to 5. Very, very interesting.
Isn't that good?
Everyone who could make that, when she does have it, should go just to understand a little bit. She covers so much area, but she did a great job presenting that, answering questions and moving the program right along. And I called her and told her thank you very much, because she did a great job. But it was very interesting just to understand the assessing, how they do it, what they think about, why they do it, stuff like that. So I thought that was very good. I don't know if you're going to say anything about the kiddie park, Dave? The kiddie park over there is being very well attended. You go over there, I stop several times. I go there several times a day if I'm going by, just to see what's going on. And I go and look. I just start looking around, and then all of a sudden, people, the parents, and I'm glad they do it, they start looking at you. Say, what are you doing here? So I go explain, I introduce myself, explain what I'm looking for and stuff like that. But also the ice rink. The ice rink is not only just the ice rink for the wintertime, the kids are getting very good use out of that. They're kickball, rollerblading, just in there having a good time. So I think it's well worth what we did over there, and that's all I want to say.
That's good. Anybody else? I want to congratulate Dan Shanahan for fire chief, and I'm anxious to see who your appointment will be.
Yeah. I think I know.
You've got a good crew to choose from. And I do want to thank all of our volunteers. I know as much as Pete's been tied up lately, he's been over at Lions Field helping an awful lot. And without Mike and Dave, I don't know, we wouldn't have swings. They did an awesome job, so I didn't even get over to help at all. I really appreciate your efforts. That's all I had. Anything else from anybody else? Anything? We have to do a closed session, so anybody want to make that?
I'll move that we enter into closed session pursuant to MCL 15.268D to consider the purchase or lease of real property up to the time of an option to purchase or lease that real property is obtained.
Support?
Okay, and it's a roll call vote. Clerk Rattari is yes. Trustee Marks?
Yes.
Trustee LaRue?
Yes.
Trustee Wiegand?
Yes.
Trustee Everson?
Yes?
Treasurer Johnson?
Yes.
And Supervisor Durant.
Yes.
Motion carries. We're in closed session at 9:08 PM.
Thank you. 9:12.
I got it on
Oh, you got it.
I got it on the computer, but.